Hey, everybody. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm going to basically try to skip through my slides as quickly as possible and actually show some product. You know, one of the most exciting things about being the field CTO is being able to get out and get in front of everybody and sort of show the advancements. And it was really heartening when I walked through the lounge this morning, or the exhibit hall, and there in the center, you had basically every screen looked like Nuix Neo. Everything was consistent. The feel of that platform was really coming together. And when I think about that, I think really about what Jonathan was saying earlier, as we think in terms of this transition and this transformation from this analog world to this digital world. And we've long held that sort of the keyword search. I mean, I have personally cranked out keyword searches to the tunes of millions of searches run across terabytes of data and reported time and time again. I personally have taken English keywords and translated them to Chinese. Just so everyone knows, I know nothing about Chinese. So that was a bit of a task. But we relied heavily on those results. And because they were accurate, they were consistent, and they were precise. And they really go to the central aspect of Nuix and that forensic precision. And so that analog world is still with us. We have that, the ability to find it and understand it. But we're on the cusp of this transition to the digital world. And the digital world is, how do I now interpret that? And as Chris was speaking, that interpretation, and Liesl, is a transformation and a translation into mathematics. And by translating these things into mathematics, you get much more uniformity and much more consistency across all of these different disciplines. And so when we talk about this and we get jazzed by it, it's really important to also sort of keep the backdrop of what Chris was also speaking about, and Liesl, that there's a responsible element. Because keywords are incredibly predictable. It's either there or it isn't. You can dig in with your dual tool approach and identify that with absolute certainty. But now what about my results? What if I run a search and I'll show you I'm desperate for cash, and you return something that says I need some money? How does that jive? Is that okay? I mean, it's the intent of the search, but it's not quite the same. So how do we think about that? How do we then think about summarization and generative and all of these? And so again, as Chris has said, with great power comes great responsibility. You have to embrace this, but you have to understand it. And understanding is difficult because it's new. It's math. But the one good thing is math is consistent across all aspects, the discipline. And so this is one of the rebrands of my favorite slides. That's kind of the reverse funnel. You start with a lot, you bring it down to a little. But the power of the lot to the little is, as you go through this journey, we're basically putting more relevant information in front of the humans. Taking those petabytes or terabytes or exabytes or however much, and allowing you, as the analyst and the operators, to get to that information more predictably. And so when we talk about the innovation all across this continuum, everything from being able to consume additional data types to the embedding of the deep learning framework. I'm going to put a huge plug in for the tech stream. Come on, check it out. David Titsky, our chief scientist, is going to be talking about the math behind this, which is really cool. You actually make this much more efficient as you drive down this process, and how we then take those embeddings, take that vectorization, and push it downstream into Discover to start thinking about delivering faster, more accurate cal. Because you're not just looking at the keywords, but you're looking at understanding the semantic space of how all this works. And so again, you may say, well, why all the hype? The hype is because when you think of innovation and you think of what it takes to innovate, and you say, well, Nuix is an amazing global company based out of Australia, how do you compete with the innovation of a Google? Or how do you compete with the innovation of a Meta when it comes to AI? They have 35,000 GPUs running 24/7, basically melting their own hole in the ozone. We don't have that, but we can benefit from that. And so by sharing that capability and leveraging that, and when we think about the different models, Nuix owned, integrated, bring your own, it's how can we take full advantage of that and really sort of drive that idea of innovating at pace? How do we sort of take that step change capability in the marketplace that you hear about every day and bring it into the use cases that you guys are working on? You guys aren't necessarily working on these crazy use cases. You have things around data privacy, investigations, legal. You're trying to understand data in a meaningful fashion to help your clients answer different questions. But what if those questions are changing? How many times have someone asked you to find an image or find everything that's like this? And you start with a keyword search, and you start with your proximities, and then you add wildcards, and then you create a thesaurus, and you come up with this enormous list of things that you kind of made up, because you're an expert. But what if there was a better way? What if there was a different way? And I'm not knocking the experts. I've done it too. I've done it myself. But you're basically injecting your experience into the equation. What if you could do that mathematically in a consistent, repeatable fashion? And so, for example, what if I wanted to take an office document, a picture, a video, an audio file, an email, a chat message, pretty much you name it, and I wanted to run it through the Nuix engine. I wanted to convert it, picture in on the right, ones and zeros, math out on the left. I think that's right. And I needed to ask a question. And the question I wanted to ask was, can you find me all of the pictures or references to a man on a beach? Right? Super easy. Run a search for a man on a beach. But what if there's no metadata on that picture that has anything to do with a man on a beach? It's just a JPEG. How would you do that? What if I could tell you that what we're working on and what we're going to show and what I was pleased to see was being heavily demonstrated this morning is about how to make that a reality? How do I do that? How do I essentially type in man on beach and return pictures of a man on a beach, or incidentally, a woman on a beach, or a family on a beach, you name it? How does it understand that? And so again, how do we drive that forward? And so I'm going to try to drive that forward and demonstrate it in the context of a scenario. I'd like to just demo the feature and show you the button. It's really exciting, but some of the folks said, can you put it into a story? So in the true spirit of generative AI, I actually cranked up ChatGPT and I created an entirely fake set of data, synthetic, that's loosely based off the movie Usual Suspects and Office Space. So if you haven't seen those movies, sorry, this will not be that fun. But if you have, it's sort of taking some of the characters and how they might be influenced by a global crime organization to exfiltrate some data. And so when you think about that, one of the common problems is organizations have lots of data, but necessarily they don't know what's in it. They don't know who's looking at it. They're not aware of it. And more times than not, you often hear that an organization is finding out about something bad that's happening from an external source. Maybe their customers are unhappy. Maybe they were informed that their information was leaked on the dark web. Well, one of the challenges that we hear about is that oftentimes organizations have huge numbers of data silos. And so in this example, we're talking about consumer complaints. So they have consumer complaints, maybe they exist in a database, maybe they come in an email, maybe they're chats, maybe they're voicemails, etc. But wouldn't it be nice if you could start to think about breaking down those data silos? And so when we think about breaking down those data silos, what we want to do is we want to first start thinking about, all right, well, familiar with something like an internet complaint, comes in, you send it, you submit it. But wouldn't it be nice if we could build a model whereby we would connect and understand and be able to programmatically link that? And so what we can do is we can take all manner of unstructured data, run it through the engine, extract the text, metadata, pull out those entities, and really start to understand its content. So here, that long number in the middle is actually a Bitcoin address. That Bitcoin address was used across 10 different customer complaints. Seems like you would want to know that as an organization. So we've defined an alert that allows us to pull that out. We've taken that information, that metadata, and we've basically pumped it into our knowledge graph so that we can understand those relationships and ask different questions of it. And this is really just very much the first stage of this process, is how could we break down those boundaries and start to look across different data silos in a fully interactive way? And so we're looking at graph data, we're understanding relationships, we're then digging deep into the actual context and are able to cross all of those boundaries quickly and efficiently to understand our content. So when we think about sort of like what might be an impetus to an organization that realizes they may have something going on, you might start with something like a customer complaint or a consumer complaint and being able to alert and understand on that. But what we have is we have 10 consumer complaints, and they all actually triggered off the same Bitcoin address. That seems like we have a problem, right? If you found that out as an organization and you were a bank that you had 10 customers that were complaining about they were all being defrauded, you'd want to act on that, right? So based off this, I have a hunch, and the hunch is, back that up. And the hunch is, Okay, can we pause that video for a second? So the hunch is that our account list has been compromised. And so with that, our account list has been compromised. So what does that logically tell you might want to do? You might want to conduct a data privacy scan. And so by conducting that data privacy scan, I actually want to run a consistent and repeatable workflow. So here enters Neo. I now need to do our data privacy, or specifically our cyber breach notification report. So let's actually cue the video to proceed. So we're going to run through our workflow. And really our workflow is a pre-configured set of steps that runs autonomously. You kick it off, it runs through that job. And this really allows you to take advantage of Nuix and specifically Neo and the unlimited workers. How can I think about going wide really fast to chew through a whole lot of information as quickly as possible? Because in the good old days, in sort of that analog world, you'd sit in front of a workstation, you'd push some buttons, you'd drive it, and it'd go really fast. But then you'd have to interpret the results. With the cyber breach notification and data privacy, we now output a report. That report is called the magnitude report, and it tells you about what's in your content. It actually can email it to you. So how much data do I have? Do I have any violations? Do I have anything that I'm specifically looking for? PII, PHI. It then delivers a nice list. And that list is really pretty simple, straightforward, in that top number is basically the total risk assigned to that document, which is probably the one that I'm most interested in. I can then jump in and take a look at that item and immediately see its content. So it's not just a static report, but it's interactive. It allows you to come into Nuix Neo. And quickly I can see I've got Social Security accounts, Social Security numbers, and what looks like monetary values. So I built a risk scoring model that will bring this information up to my attention. And actually, if I could pause the video one more time. All right, so what we then have is when we think about what can be done with the models, it's not just about PII and PHI. So when we started on our data privacy journey, we were talking about PII and PHI. But then what quickly came to light is that if you're in a boardroom and you've potentially been compromised, you're interested in very different things. You may be interested in what is your actual risk associated with PII and PHI, because you may have regulatory requirements that you need to run through. But you're probably more likely interested in, did you just lose a bunch of critical intellectual property? And if you just lost a bunch of critical intellectual property, you're interested in building models. And you might want to build a model that allows you to define what an organization's IP looks like so that you can find it fast. You can then take that model and score it based off its risk. Because risk is essentially an analogy for priority. I want to look at the thing that is the highest risk or the most important first. And I want to do that as fast and efficiently as possible. And I don't really just want a static report. What I want is to be able to jump in and interact with that data. And when we think about being able to jump in and interact with that data, that's really what we're talking about, that entire solution, bringing all of those components and all those pieces together with Nuix Neo. It is that platform. It's not just here's this one-off or here's this piece. And so again, when Jonathan set us on this course, to build the Neo platform and to pull these parts together, it was really how do we deliver an integrated solution? How do we provide all of these parts as not just parts, but as a common platform? And so if we think back to sort of our X-Corp bank journey, they realized they had a problem because they had a bunch of Bitcoin. They did a quick data privacy scan across their various assets, and they realized, whoops, that account list that we kind of jumped through actually existed in a guy, Pete Gibbons' file share. For anybody that watched Office Space, Pete was the main character. He had a crush on Joanna, incidentally. That's also in the data that was able to be generated pretty easily from ChatGPT. But then, if you can take that, then you can sort of assume that you're probably going to then have a need to dig into that a little bit deeper. And so I think it's reasonable to suspect that now we need to conduct an investigation. So we've gone through from the data privacy solution to the investigation solution. And we're still very much actually in our traditional analog world. We're talking about keywords, we're looking at PII, we're looking at PHI. If you want to think about the transition to the digital world, start to think about looking for contracts or documents across multiple different languages without having to train your models. You could take an exemplar document, convert that to those vectors, and then run your searches as all part of your automated process. But now as we go down this journey, it's safe to assume that something bad is happening. Let's investigate. And so that next piece is we're actually going to run sort of the full Nuix Neo Investigations Analytics package. And what that entails is we're going to process the data, we're going to pump it through NLP, we're going to find how we want to handle that information, what goes in. And again, the beauty of this is the automation. I could do it consistently, repeatably, every single time. If I could pause the video for a sec. We spent a lot of time this morning talking about generative AI and sort of how does that work and what is it and how is it and where does it fit in. So at the moment, Nuix is using the bring your own generative AI model approach. Because again, the idea of bringing generative AI and putting Nuix's stamp on it is a tremendous risk. Because it's generating new content. How good is it? How accurate is it? How reliable is it? So when we think about that, the driver is to be able to deliver these types of solutions on premise. That's a big lift. That's part of our journey, but we're not there today. Yet there's a huge amount of pressure in the marketplace to be able to take advantage of generative AI. And so we've embraced the bring your own API key model. And it's really pretty awesome. You can provide your context prompt. So you're an investigator working on a case. So I guess quick show of hands, how many people have played with ChatGPT? You are part of the 100 million people that adopted it in like the first month. This whole idea of a context prompt, tell ChatGPT who you are so it knows the context in which it should respond. When I generated the synthetic data, I said, write me an email thread as a middle-aged white male with a college education that works at a bank. And you know what? It materially changed the output of the model, like as what was being output. So here, you can define your context. You're an investigator. You can define your prompts. And these are all entirely configurable. We created these prompts. Does your document contain privileged information? Does the document indicate that fraudulent activity was committed? What is the score? And essentially, it'll execute a process by which for each item, it'll run that through, it'll ask the large language model of your choice and record that information as metadata. It'll then write that back and color code it so that you know that it's generative. If you could cue the video. Last piece is then you can start to ask follow-up prompts. So how are you contextualizing it? So again, all of these different pieces, and what's really neat about it is it's available as part of an automated workflow and super simple to make it repeatable. So now we're going to sort of jump into our investigation. So we process the data, it's in there, let's sort of we smell some smoke, let's search for the word account list. So again, our analog keyword world. My first text message talking about accounts, I get those hits. Found this chat message, oops, looks like I have a Bitcoin address. Maybe I want to pivot out and understand what that relationship looks like. And so here we're just taking advantage of our ability to integrate across these multiple systems. And again, I've aggregated all of my data to start to break down those data silos into Nuix's knowledge graph. Nuix's knowledge graph is then not just text messages or emails, but it's all of our unstructured data. You're not individually dragging and dropping these nodes or identifying these. This is all done programmatically as part of our workflow. So again, making all of these things smarter. This last piece I think is actually just kind of cool. Again, leveraging the ability to extend and reach beyond. Every once in a while you find some foreign text that you might be interested in. Why not just take a quick link and basically put it out either something like Google Translate, or you could use your own internal translation service. But the idea is the platform is incredibly extensible to be able to drive these processes. And again, everyone needs to understand chat messages. It's kind of the lifeblood. Who's talking to who, the frequency of their communication, being able to drill in and understand all of that. And so again, Nuix is used around the globe by people looking at chat messages every single day as part of our core components. Actually, if I could also get the video paused one more time. This is now the pivot into when we're talking about from the analog world to the digital world. We talked about keywords. We talked about understanding text and chat. We're now transitioning to the digital. So we've taken this data as part of our automated workflow, we've run it through the Nuix engine, we've extracted the text and metadata, we've done all of this consistently and repeatedly, but now we've also taken this data and we've vectorized it, magic math. And essentially we've taken it, we've run it through the deep learning framework, and we have used models to convert that to now I can run searches for both text or images semantically. So go ahead and play the video for me. So I am desperate for some cash. We're trying to understand Pete's motive, right? What is he doing? I'm not running a keyword search. I'm not trying to put my mind in, or myself in Pete's shoes. Ran a search. Okay. I understand. Got any ideas for quick cash? Oop, I now find a hit about being in financial trouble because he's sick. Okay? So now I'm starting to understand information that's beyond just simple keywords. I can then adjust my score to be a little bit more permissive, and now I find some more information. And so that more information might be, let's see where we go. I want the money. You know, again, didn't look for cash, didn't look for desperate, but certainly that is indicative of someone being desperate for money. Now, oops, sorry, that doesn't point there, doesn't help. Again, pulling in these additional emails. So that idea of being able to do this, and that's quick note on that, that's now in German. So being able to take that same idea of I am desperate for cash, but do that same search in German and get those same results back. Yes, I have crazy bills, need to get out of this job. So again, multilingual. By normalizing that thing into math, you now have the ability to search not just in one language, but search across languages. Let's be honest, it's not perfect. It's not as good as if you truly translated it, but it is indicative. As you can see, this is not, I mean, the data's fake, but you know, we just searched in German, and maybe, but work's been killing me. You know, so again, starting to understand the meaning. What's awesome is this doesn't just work on text, it also works on images. So here, you know, we found sort of, when I search for I hate this job, something about, you know, wanting to have another job, get out in the sun, the sand, and the sea, and I found a picture. I'm going to take that picture, escape, you know, looks like a place to escape to, but now I'm going to find similar items using this same vector-based approach. And I'm going to basically use the math to have it show me other pictures. So now I found these other items. And you can see these numbers. These numbers basically represent how much we think it's like that. And so again, leveraging all of that. So again, talking about our natural language text. Search on sports car, right? Bang, sports cars. To me, like having tried to do that by looking through millions of pictures in the gallery, that is unbelievable. Similarly, if I want to search that, for those that can't, that's sports car in Chinese. Same results. Imagine the power and the facility to sort of accelerate how you find information contained within Nuix cases through this digital transformation. You're able to now move faster with less time spent specifically defining keywords. This one I find is amazing. I'm going to search for family photo. Boom. Something highly subjective, family photos. Apparently the models are trained to think that Bart Simpson and Homer are a family. But now family on a beach. How about family on a beach with a dog? I'm a little ahead of myself. Imagine that. Imagine trying to sift through that and uncover all of that information. Similarly, if I want to be doing this in a foreign language, that's basically the equivalent in French. Same results. Red sports car. Boom. Now, we had some discussion as to whether or not the model should accurately declare a wagon as a sports car, but we're going to sort of give that. Blue sports car. So just imagine like trying to do this again. Like you're kind of seeing it and it's like, all right, well, that's interesting. But like imagine trying to do that in an analog world where you're actually having to define that. You have to search for JPEGs and then sift through the list. So now let's take that next step. We also added generative aspects into that to be able to ask questions. And so we asked about, you know, is there any potentially privileged information or is there any potentially fraudulent information? And so I highlight this because what Chris mentioned is as part of our responsible AI program, we need to be able to highlight that some of this information has been generated. It's not evidentiary. We've enriched it through generative capabilities. So we're color coding. It's a little washed out on the screen, but this is purple and various shades. And if you noticed on the pictures, each one of the scores was purple. And this little icon here where you search is purple. It's basically trying to differentiate that analog digital, that keyword search versus the vector-based or semantic search so that you can understand the difference and basically bring it forward. You know, even sort of down to the detail of which model we used to be able to define that. So again, that transparency, even in the bring your own model world. So if we go back to sort of our progression, we have an investigation. Pete was colluding We didn't kind of go into too much detail. If you want to sort of dig into the data, you can stop by one of the demo booths. By the way, there's Pete, Larry, and Sammy. Pete has a huge crush on Joanna. Pete's short on cash. He needs to make it. He's now hooked up through his buddy Larry to actually give the account list to Kobayashi, who's ultimately connected to Kaiser Soze. So that is for all of you I can see the ones that are smiling, that know those movies and are laughing, and the rest of you are like, what is that clown talking about? But it's all supported through sort of an easy model. But with that in mind, I think it's reasonable that X Corp Bank should be preparing for litigation. Their account list has been breached, their customers are compromised, and their customers are being directly defrauded by the bad guys. And so let's take that last look as we think about our various progressions. So as with any litigation, did you reasonably anticipate litigation? You need to notify those that might be on legal hold. As part of Nuix Neo, you have the ability to define holds, push hold templates, run surveys, releases, manage and report on that entire process. So this is all part of Neo and the ability to drive that process. You can then send out and monitor not just the releases, but monitor that process, release it, manage it, and really execute that entire activity. You can then, in sort of continuing that progression, huge swaths of our data exist in Purview. And so one of the biggest complaints we've heard about Purview is actually executing the workflow in Purview is pretty painful. So we've automated that process. You can drive the Purview API. You can define the custodians that you're interested in. You can define if you want their OneDrive, their mailbox. You can pull information out of Exchange. You can also connect and get it out of SharePoint. All in an automated and consistent process. Define your workflow, execute it, and the outcome of a Purview Neo workflow is it kicks off the rest of your Nuix processing. Define your ad review sets. Essentially any of the buttons that you have to go in and push in Purview, you can push in Neo, and we'll execute that process for you all the way through to being able to pull out the CDS file, normalize that CDS file, and use it inside Nuix. So again, huge aspects. Now this piece, as we talk about running the process, but we also want to talk about how do we AI enable this to accelerate outcomes for our customers. And so here, we're loading data, but we're going to basically perform our clustering for AI sampling. So again, another workflow. So you'll sort of see the pattern is we're not just talking about the tech we're using, but we're talking about the workflows we can run. Here, we basically have created a cluster report using the vectored embeddings to basically drive this process. And similar to the magnitude report, deliver a report. That report allows you to analyze it and then link directly into that information. So we found our cluster where Pete and Sammy were talking about people with large account balances. If you were really astute, you would have noticed that Felix Schumacher was one of the emails that was originally defrauded. So all of these things are going full circle as we look at all of this information across multiple different disciplines and really try to break down those silos. Since we're leveraging generative AI to generate cluster summaries, we're leveraging this information as purple. So again, it's how do we embrace AI across all of these different disciplines to drive that outcome, but then ultimately get it out of the ECA world and up into Discover for review and analysis, where I need to scale out my eyes. So here, yet again, another Neo workflow. I love Neo workflows because it saves all of the button pushing time that I've done in the past, but I can take my information. I can define a production set. I can use everybody's favorite box folder page numbering and promote that information up to Discover in a single, simple fashion. I can define what metadata needs to get pushed. So if I want to push, in this example, my clustering metadata, so I can push that information up and drive that process. So again, it's not just about the data existing in Neo, but it's about the data being part of Nuix's broader legal solution, which includes Discover. And so it's not just the individual components, but it's that entire continuum. And when we think about that continuum, it's about how do I maximize where the data lives. Brendan was talking about, or the ambassador was talking about security, and where do I keep that information? How do I understand it? What gets promoted? The minimal amount of information. So here we've promoted our cluster pivots. These cluster pivots have our box folder page numbering. That information has just been pushed as a minimal collection of documents up to discover, or as opposed to pushing all of it. One of the enhancements is being able to add in the AI enrichment. So now we're able to take that NLP enrichment that is giving you scores about what is this document about, what does its content look like, and taking advantage of it in Discover. Multiple different ways in which we can look at it. And one of the great things about what is happening here, and Jonathan alluded to it and Chris alluded to it, is now that that information is part of the item and is carrying along with it, we can start to do other things with it like CAL, so continuous active learning. And we're seeing some really great results by pulling more information into the CAL model beyond just its existing text, but leveraging the classifications, leveraging the scores, and also leveraging any of the associated vectors. And so, let's see what we got here. Okay. So, on our X Corp bank, and by the way, I can't see anything that says how long I've been going, so I'm just going to apologize. Like, I have 3 screens, and not a single one of them says how much time I have left. Probably not much. But what we've talked about from the X Corp bank journey, overtime by 55 seconds, thank you. G, did you push that button? Or that might have been a vet. Wouldn't it be better if an organization didn't have to be notified by its customers that it had a problem? So in our X Corp bank scenario, it was a consumer complaint that they linked together because 10 consumers' information had been exposed and they were attempting to be defrauded. So Nuix also has a product called Nuix Adaptive Security. Adaptive Security allows you to be proactive with understanding this and really push forward. And so we've had some great traction in the US government around insider threat. And so here we have Pete's PC. Pete is not a super sophisticated user, but he's going to exfiltrate some data. And so he's going to go into, he created a folder for Larry, not super sophisticated, but he's going to go and he's going to navigate, and he tried to be sneaky, and he put the account list inside his friends list zip file, because if you rename it friends, no one's going to pay any attention to it. And then he drag and drop it out to his Google Drive. Simple process of data exfiltration. Happens all the time. But what if you had Nuix Adaptive Security? What would that look like? Could we generate an alert based off that digital behavior that would allow us to collect and understand that information and potentially prevent it? So an adaptive security is effectively an endpoint monitoring and digital behaviors capability that allows us to understand what's happening on the endpoints, but then most importantly, build out customizable rules that allow us to take different action, alert, or do other things with it. So here we have a rule with our configurable library or configurable language that allows us to sort of understand and potentially take action. This happens to be our event. Now, this is the thing that I find, when they showed this to me the first time, I shouldn't act surprised, but this is the coolest thing. So we're essentially continually rolling screenshots, one every second. And we keep basically a cache of up to 2 minutes before any alert. So what that basically means is that instead of capturing something after the alert, you actually know what happened before. And you can see that little bit of history that led up to it. And so what we can see is we just replayed Pete dragging that file out into Google Drive. Now, how awesome is that? Like, it wasn't that any event, but that alert was built to detect PII and PHI. So it's not that Pete dragged a specific file or something, but it's Pete dragged something that met a rule, and then we're able to act on that. We collected that. We had that information. And as we think about progressing this, it's how do we bring all of those elements together to allow organizations to get more proactive? And so therein sort of the story for X Corp Bank. They had a problem. They deployed Nuix's solutions to be able to understand it from a data privacy perspective, from an investigations perspective, and from a legal solutions perspective to be able to understand that. And so they came across that. And so the last pieces that I want to touch on before we sort of go out to lunch is really the innovation across the board. And so Jonathan touched on it, Chris touched on it, but really sort of the first stage is things that we've done with Nuix Discover. And that continuous innovation pathway of pushing more analytics and most importantly, pulling everything together. Nuix had long been a component company and a product company, but now by thinking about Nuix Neo and pulling these different elements together, it's how are we pulling it all together? So cognitive AI and Discover, so the integration of Nuix NLP, the vectors, the classifications, pulling that together, not for just browsing, but to be able to accelerate CAL. How do we make those parts easier from a review perspective? The native Excel redaction, obviously the ability to drive that workflow from end to end. So again, tremendous innovation and execution in Discover. And one of the big announcements that Jonathan alluded to is actually V10, and really pushing V10 as the next component or the next piece that's available for the analog and the component world. So again, focusing on allowing those data sources that we've added in, the improved security. You know, Ambassador was talking about secure by design to ensure that you've got all those elements, making sure that all the patches are available, all of those things, the increased extensibility, the review. And so with that, I would like to thank everyone for their time and attention this morning. As you can tell, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I think one of the things that's most exciting, having been up here with Nuix for 16 years, is to watch this platform come together. You know, I've done this with like demoing Workstation for a long time, and it's pretty hard to get excited about shingling, but I do. To be able to demonstrate an end-to-end platform with an automated workflow that is now being turbocharged by a deep learning library that allows us to take full advantage of the global pace of innovation and AI is extraordinary. And so with that, enjoy the break. Check out the streams this afternoon. You've got the legal stream, the corporate stream, the government stream, and you know my natural favorite, the tech stream. And so with that, thank you. I think, Warren, you've got a few